I have kept a ledger for 31 years, and the ledger is the reason I am alive to tell you about the Othel. I want to be clear about that up front because the way these stories usually go, somebody tells you about the brave human who stared down the aliens and dared them to do their worst. That is not the story. I never dared anybody to do anything. I am a quartermaster. My whole working life has been spent counting things, writing the count in a book, and then counting them again in case I was wrong the first time. There is no glory in it. There has never been any glory in it. But it kept a station full of people breathing when the smartest forecast engine in 3 trade lanes decided that the thing happening to us could not possibly be happening. And I have made a sort of peace with the fact that this is the most interesting thing I will ever have done. The station was called the Hawser. If you have never heard of it, that is by design. A good resupply anchorage is one nobody has any reason to think about. It hung at the cold, lonely middle of the Kale Reach, a stretch of deep lane between 2 systems that did not much like each other and traded anyway, the way neighbors do. Ships came in tired and left full. We sold fuel, water, sealant, line, ration stock, and the 100 small parts that break on long hauls and cannot be fabricated in transit. We mended what could be mended. We were not a port of call. We were the place you were glad existed when something went wrong 4 weeks out from anywhere, and nobody ever thanked us, and that was fine. Gratitude is not a deliverable. I ran the readiness hold. 6 decks of it, racked floor to ceiling, every aisle labeled, every bin counted, every count in the book. And the thing you have to understand about the readiness hold, the thing that started all of this, is that I kept 2 of everything. More than 2, for the things that mattered. I kept a spare for the part and a spare for the spare, and somewhere in the cold back rows I kept a third in case the first 2 had both come from the same bad batch. I ran drills. Power loss drills, seal breach drills, dark station drills, where we killed the lights on purpose, and made the crew find the manual valves by feel. I kept hand tools that needed no power in a station that had run on power for 40 years. I kept a stack of paper manifests in a sealed locker because paper does not need a system to read it. My crews thought I was a little much. My own people, I mean. They were good and they were patient and they did the drills, but they thought I was a little much. I knew it. I did not mind. A quartermaster who is not a little much is a quartermaster who will one day reach into a bin and find it empty, and on a station 4 weeks from help, an empty bin is how people die. So I was a little much. It is, I think, the most useful thing a person can be. The Othel arrived on a clear, quiet shift with no warning except a docking request, which was itself a kind of statement, because the Othel always knew exactly when they would arrive and exactly what they would find. And a docking request from them was a courtesy extended to lesser beings who needed time to prepare. We did not need time to prepare. We were always prepared. That was the whole point of me. But they sent the request anyway, 11 hours out, and I logged it, and I went and put the good coffee on. Let me tell you about the Othel, because if you do not understand them, you will not understand why any of this was funny. And underneath everything else it was very funny, in the dry, slow way that the best things are. The Othel were tall and thin and beautifully made, all long joints, and a translucent crest that flushed color when they were pleased or troubled, which on the Othel amounted to the same expression read in different light. They moved like people who had never once stubbed a toe. And they carried nothing. That is the part I want you to sit with, because it was the center of their whole civilization, and they were proud of it the way you and I are proud of the things we cannot imagine living without. An Othel walked onto your deck with empty hands and an empty back and not one spare anything, because to carry a spare was to admit you did not know the future, and the Othel knew the future. They had built an engine to know it. They called it the tally. The tally was, I will grant them this freely, an extraordinary thing. It ran their entire logistics across the lanes on prediction alone. It knew how much fuel a ship would burn before the ship knew. It knew which part would fail and shipped the replacement to arrive the shift before the failure, never a shift early, because a shift early was waste, and waste was the one obscenity the Othel truly believed in. They held no stockpiles. They kept no reserves. Every gram of cargo in an Othel hold was a gram with a destination and an arrival time, and the chain moved like a single perfect thread pulled taut between need and supply, and it had not snapped in 900 years. They were not lying about that. I checked later. 900 years. So you can see why they looked at me the way they did. The one in charge was a factor named Sev. A factor, as best I ever understood it, was something between an auditor and a missionary. Sev had come to the hawser to bring us into the tally. The two systems at the ends of the Kale Reach had signed something, and the something said the lane's resupply would be modernized, and modernization meant the Othel, and the Othel meant Seve, and Seve meant me eventually, though it took the factor most of a shift to work down to the part of the station where the actual supplies were kept, because the factor was busy being appalled by everything on the way. I met Seve in the readiness hold by arrangement. I thought it was polite to show a guest the thing I was proudest of. That was my mistake, if you want to call it one, though I have never been able to make myself regret it. The factor came down the central aisle of the first deck with two aides trailing behind and stopped, and the crest went a pale considering green, and I watched the factor try to make sense of what it was seeing. 6 decks, racks to the ceiling, every bin full, every aisle a wall of redundancy stretching off into the cold. "This is your hold," Sev said. The translator gave the factor a smooth, even voice, almost kind. "This is the readiness hold," I said. "There's bulk storage 2 decks up, but this is the one I'd want you to see." "How much of this is allocated?" "None of it," I said. "It's reserve." The crest brightened. I would learn to read that brightening as the Othel equivalent of a slow, incredulous blink. "Reserve," Sev repeated, as if testing the word for soundness. "Reserve against what?" "Against need," I said. "Things break, ships come in hurt. We don't always know what they'll need, so we keep what they might." "You keep what they might need." The factor turned in a slow circle, taking in the racks, and the crest ran through 3 colors in a breath. "You have built 6 decks of station around the things that might be needed and are not. You have devoted your station's mass, its volume, its accounting, its labor, to the storage of objects that have no destination and no arrival time. Quartermaster, do you understand what I am looking at?" "A full hold," I said. "Waste," said Seve. "I am looking at waste. I have never in my life seen so much of it gathered in one place. It is almost a marvel. It is almost beautiful, the scale of it. I have been insulted by experts in my time, captains who lost a part and wanted it to be my fault, inspectors from the 2 systems who needed a number to be lower than it was. But I will say for the factor that it was the first time anyone had ever stood in my hold and called the thing I had spent my life building beautiful and meant it as the worst thing they could think of to say. There was a purity to it. I appreciated the purity. "You'd want some of this," I said, "if you broke down out here." "We do not break down out here," Seve said. "We break down where the tally has placed the repair. We break down on schedule, quartermaster, into the waiting hands of the part that was sent to meet us. That is the difference between your people and mine. You prepare for everything because you can predict nothing. We prepare for nothing because we predict everything. One of these is a discipline. The other," the crest flushed, almost gentle, "is a comfort blanket the size of a freighter." I want to tell you that I had some sharp thing ready to say back. I did not. I have never been quick. The quick people I have known mostly talked themselves into trouble I then had to supply them out of. So I just nodded, the way you nod at a man who has told you something he is sure of, and I said, "There's coffee in the office if you'd like to see the manifests." That was the first day. There were a great many more days, and they all went more or less like that, and I am not going to pretend it didn't wear on me, because it did. Not the insults, the decommissioning. Seve had not come to look. Seve had come to optimize, and optimizing the hawser meant cutting it down to the single perfect thread. The tally had already modeled my station. It knew, or believed it knew, exactly which ships would arrive over the coming cycles, exactly what they would need, exactly when. And against that knowledge, my 6 decks of reserve were not insurance. They were embarrassment. They were a confession written in inventory that I did not trust the future to behave. So the cutting started. The factor's aides went through my hold with the tally's projections, and they marked bin after bin for clearance. Not gone yet, but marked. The duplicate seals, the third spare valves, the hand tools, the dark station gear. The tally had run the numbers, and the numbers said no ship arriving in the modeled cycles would need them, and an object that will not be needed is, by the only definition the Othel cared about, garbage that has not yet been thrown away. I would walk the aisles after their shift ended and read the marks, whole rows of my life, tagged for clearance because a forecast said they would sit untouched. And I'll be honest with you, there were nights I came close to losing my patience, which for me is a thing that happens about once a decade and that I am not proud of. But I am a quartermaster. I have a quartermaster's faith, and a quartermaster's faith is this: the bin you mock is the bin you reach for. It is the oldest thing I know. So instead of arguing, I did the thing I have always done. I kept the book. When they cleared a bin, I wrote down what had been in it. When they decommissioned a drill, I noted the date and the reason. When they rerouted a supply line to run lean off the tally, I recorded the old line and what it had carried and how long it had taken to fill. I did not fight them. The 2 systems had signed the something, and a quartermaster does not get to overrule what the systems sign. But I kept the book, and I quietly did a few other things too, which I will come to, because they matter. And because I have decided in my old age that there is no point telling a story if you leave out the part where you cheated. The drills were what the factor hated most after the hold. SciFi could almost forgive the spares. They were waste, but they were inert waste, just sitting there being foolish. The drills were active foolishness. They cost labor. They cost time. And the tally had a number for what they cost, and the number offended the factor personally. I ran a dark station drill the second week of the Othel being aboard, on the schedule, because the schedule was the schedule, and I was not going to let an audit interrupt the things that kept my people alive. We killed the lights on 3 decks. We killed them on purpose. And my crews moved through the dark by feel and by count, finding the manual valves, the hand pumps, the sealant by touch, calling out their positions, doing the thing we had done 100 times so that if we ever had to do it once for real, it would be the 101st time and not the first. SciFi watched from the gantry with the crest gone a flat, unreadable amber. "Explain this," the factor said when the lights came back. "Power loss procedure," I said. "If we lose the main and the backup both, the crew needs to be able to run the critical systems by hand in the dark, so we practice it in the dark. You have lost main and backup power simultaneously how many times in the station's history?" "Never," I said. "Never," the crest flickered. "You drill in the dark, costing yourself labor and morale and the wear of your equipment, against an event that has never once occurred in 40 years of operation. The tally rates the probability of simultaneous main and backup loss at this anchorage as effectively 0. Not low, quartermaster. 0 to the resolution the model reports, and you spend your people's shifts preparing for it." "That's right," I said. "Why?" And here is the thing I said to the factor, and I said it without any particular weight, because at the time it was just the truest plain answer I had, and I did not know I would spend the rest of my life being asked to repeat it. "Because the day it happens," I said, "nobody's going to care what the probability was." The crest did something complicated. The factor turned and left the gantry without another word, and I thought, well, that landed somewhere, though I could not have told you where. I went back to logging the drill. Crew found all the valves in the dark in under 9 minutes. I wrote it in the book, 9 minutes. Then I wrote under it, the way I sometimes did when I had a thought I wanted to keep, "Run it again next month," and I did not tell anyone, because the tally had decommissioned that drill the week before, and I was, quietly, not going to stop running it. That was the first thing I cheated on. The second was bigger, and I am still not entirely sure how I let myself do it, except that 30 years of keeping a hold teaches you a particular kind of stubbornness that lives below the part of you that follows orders. The factor's people were clearing the readiness hold, deck by deck, hauling my reserve out to be returned, scrapped, or folded into the tally's lean modeled flow. And I let them. Mostly. But there was a back section of the lowest deck, cold and badly lit and inconvenient to reach, that the inventory system listed as decommissioned, racking, empty, slated for removal. It was not empty. I had spent 3 quiet shifts moving things into it. The full power loss kit, a complete set of hand tools, sealant enough to close a serious breach by hand, manual pumps, the paper manifests, water purification tabs, the chemical kind that need no machine, ration stock. 2 of everything that I had decided, in the privacy of my own judgment, the hawser could not be allowed to be without, no matter what any forecast said. It was against the agreement. I knew it was against the agreement. I did it anyway, and I logged it in my own book and nowhere else, and if you want to think less of me for it, you are welcome to, but I would ask you to wait until the end. The Othel chain came online a month in. The factor was very proud. I will give SciFi that. The pride was earned by the standards the Othel held, and the standards the Othel held had not failed in 900 years. The hawser ran lean now, single thread. Every part that arrived had a destination and an arrival time. Reserve was gone, the official reserve anyway. Ships came in and the tally had already placed what they would need, shift before the need, into hands that were waiting. And I will be fair, it was a marvel to watch. For a few weeks I half-talked myself into believing the factor had been right and I had been a foolish old man hoarding garbage in the dark. The chain was so clean, so sure, nothing sat. Nothing waited. Nothing was wasted. The tally hummed in its housing and the future arrived on time, again and again, exactly as predicted, and the factor's crest sat in a contented gold the whole while. SciFi came down to the office near the end of that stretch, the chain singing along behind us, and stood in the door watching me update the book by hand. "You are still writing in the book," the factor said. "I am. There is nothing in the book that the tally does not hold better." "Probably not," I said and kept writing. The crest went a soft, amused color. "You cannot let go of it the old way. Even now, with the chain running clean around you, you sit and you write things down by hand as if the act of recording could change what is recorded. It is a kind of superstition, quartermaster. I say this without unkindness. Your whole species has it. You believe that if you prepare enough, write enough, count enough, drill enough, you can. What is the phrase your records use? You can remember the future. Prepare for it as if you had already lived it. But you cannot. No one can. The future is not a thing you remember. It is a thing my engine calculates and yours cannot, and so you have built a religion of preparation to comfort yourselves in your ignorance. It is, I think, the most human thing about you, the wanting to remember a thing that has not happened." I stopped writing then, and I looked at the factor, because for all that it was meant as the deepest cut SciFi had yet found, it was also the kindest the factor had ever been to me, and the closest the factor ever came to understanding the thing it was standing in the middle of. "That's about right," I said. "We try to remember the future. We're not always good at it, but we try." "And how," the factor asked, "does one remember a future one cannot predict?" "You keep 2 of everything," I said, "and you practice in the dark." SciFi's crest flushed once, gently, the way it did when the factor had decided a thing was beneath answering, and then the factor left, satisfied, and I went back to the book. The lane storm came 11 days later, and the tally never saw it. I should explain about lane storms because they are real and they are the reason the deep lanes are deep lanes and not highways. A lane storm is what happens when the medium that ships fold through gets disturbed, by what the physicists still argue, and I am no physicist. What I know is the practical end of it. A lane storm comes up fast, it scrambles fold navigation for a wide region, and it does 2 things to a station like the hawser. It slams the door. Nothing folds in or out for the duration, which can be hours or can be days. and it floods the region with ships that were mid-transit when the storm hit and had nowhere to go but the nearest hard point, which was us. The tally had a number for lane storms in the Kale Reach. It was not zero. The Othel were not fools, but it was low, and the model's confidence in its own timing was total, and a lane storm is, by its deep, ugly nature, the one thing a prediction engine is worst at, because it does not announce itself and it does not follow the pattern of the things before it. The tally had placed the season's storm risk in a window 3 weeks out. The storm came 11 days after the chain went lean, in a window the model rated as clear, and it came hard, and it came with 11 ships behind it that had been thrown out of fold mid-transit and came limping to the hawser hurt and crowded and afraid, all at once, with the door slammed shut behind them and no way out for what turned out to be 4 days. I was in the office when the first alerts hit. I want to describe what happened in the Othel chain in those first hours, because it was the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched, and I watched it with a feeling I am not proud of and could not entirely suppress, which was a deep, terrible understanding that I had been right, and that being right was going to get a great many people killed if I did not move fast. The chain seized. That is the only word for it. The tally was built to supply need it had foreseen, shift before the need with nothing held back. And now the need had arrived, 11 ships of it all at once, none of it modeled, none of it scheduled, hands reaching for parts and fuel and sealant and medical stock that the chain had not placed because the chain had not known they would be reached for. There was no reserve. There was nothing waiting. The single perfect thread had been pulled taut between need and supply, and now the need had multiplied 11-fold in an instant, and the thread did the only thing a taut thread can do when you multiply the load. It did not stretch. It snapped. And the Othel did not know what to do. That is the part I had not foreseen in all my foreseeing. I had thought, if I had thought about it at all, that when the reserve ran out the Othel would simply do without, efficiently, the way they did everything. But the Othel had never run out. In 900 years the chain had never failed them, and so they had never developed the thing that my whole foolish, wasteful life had been spent developing, which is the muscle of what you do when the supply is not there. They had no procedure for shortage because they had never had shortage. They stood at empty cradles where the tally said a part should be, and the part was not there, and the storm howled outside, and the hurt ships called in with needs the chain could not fill, and the Othel, I say this with no pleasure, the Othel began to come apart. The factor found me 3 decks down, in the cold, badly lit back section of the lowest level, the one the inventory listed as empty racking slated for removal, and I was already moving, because I had spent 31 years getting ready to move, and I had 11 ships in 4 days, and a station full of people who needed things that were, every one of them, in the bins around me that the tally had said would never be touched. SciFi stopped at the end of the aisle. The crest had gone a color I had not seen before, a kind of bled-out gray, and the long, beautiful joints were held wrong, stiff, like a thing that has forgotten how it stands. "This racking is decommissioned," the factor said. The translator's smooth voice came out thin. "It is empty. The system lists it as empty." "I know what the system lists it as," I said. I had a manual pump in each hand and I was carrying them to the lift because the powered hauler was committed to the docks. "Stand out of the aisle, factor. I've got people to supply." "It is not empty," SciFi said. The factor was looking at the racks. 6 bays of them full in the dark, the thing the tally had declared garbage that had not yet been thrown away. "You kept it. After the chain went lean. After the agreement, you kept all of this in the dark, where the system could not see." "2 of everything," I said, "and I practiced in the dark. Now move or carry something." I would like to tell you the factor stood there frozen while I worked, so that I could be the hero of it, but that is not what happened, and the truest thing in this whole story is the thing the factor did next, which is that SciFi moved out of the aisle, and then SciFi picked up a manual pump, and then the factor of the Othel, who had walked onto my deck weeks before with empty hands and called my life's work waste, carried it to the lift behind me without another word. The 4 days that followed are not interesting in the way you might want them to be. There was no battle. Nobody dared anybody to do their worst. It was work. It was the most work I have ever done in a stretch and the most work I ever will. It was running on no sleep and reaching into bins by feel because we lost power on the lower decks twice when the storm surged and the backup faltered, and finding the valves in the dark because we had practiced finding the valves in the dark against an event the tally had rated at 0, which was now happening, and nobody cared what the probability had been. I had been right about that too. Nobody cared. We patched the hurt ships with sealant closed by hand. We pumped fuel by manual when the automated line stalled under load. We purified water with the chemical tabs that needed no machine. We fed 11 ships worth of frightened crews out of ration stock that the tally had marked for clearance, and I checked each draw-off against the paper manifest in the sealed locker, by hand, by the light of a work lamp, because the inventory system was choking, and the book does not need a system to read it. The book never has. And the Othel learned. I will give them this, and it is the thing I respect them most for, more than the tally, more than 900 years. They had no muscle for shortage, but they were not stupid, and they were not cowards once they had a thing to do with their hands. The Factor's people took the dark station drill from my crews in the worst possible way to learn it, which is for real, in the dark, with the storm howling, and they were clumsy and slow and afraid, and they learned it anyway, because the alternative was to stand at empty cradles and wait for an engine to save them, and the engine could not, because the engine had bet everything on knowing a future that had arrived wearing a face it had never modeled. On the 3rd day, in a quiet hour when the storm had dropped to a sullen mutter, and we had finally gotten ahead of the worst of it, the Factor found me in the office. I was updating the book. Of course I was updating the book. Sev stood in the door the way the Factor had stood in the door weeks before, when the chain was singing and the future was arriving on time, and my hold was being carried out bin by bin into the cold. The crest was a low, steady color I had not seen, not the contented gold, not the bled-out gray, something in between, something settled. I require a part, the Factor said, for the medical cradle on the 3rd Othel ship. It has failed. The tally placed no replacement because the tally did not forecast the load, and so there is none in the chain. I have come to ask, and here the Factor stopped, and the crest moved, and I understood that the Factor was doing a thing that no Othel had done in 900 years, which was to stand in front of another being and admit, out loud in words, that the future had arrived and found them without. I have come to ask whether you have a spare. I looked at the Factor for a moment. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the easy thing would be to tell you I felt vindicated, and there was some of that. There is no use pretending otherwise. But mostly what I felt was tired, and underneath the tired, a kind of plain practical relief. Because a Factor who has come to ask for the spare is a Factor who is going to be useful for the rest of the storm, and I needed everyone useful. Aisle 4, Bay 9, 2nd deck of the back section, I said. It'll be in a green bin 3rd from the floor. There's 2 of them, take 1. The crest flushed. Take both, I said before the Factor could say it, in case the first's from a bad batch. And Sev, the Factor of the Othel, who had stood in my hold and called it the most beautiful waste the universe had ever gathered in one place, looked at me for a long moment, and the crest went through a whole slow sequence of colors I could not read. And then the Factor said the only thing the Factor ever said to me, that I have kept word for word all these years. You remembered this, Sev said, all of it. You remembered a future my engine swore could not come. How? I put down my pen. I was too tired to be clever, and I have never been clever anyway, so I told the Factor the truth. The same truth I had told it on the gantry. The same truth I had told it in the office. The only truth I have ever really had to offer anyone. I didn't remember it, I said. I just figured the day it happened, nobody'd care what the probability was, so I kept 2 of everything, and I practiced in the dark. The storm broke on the 4th day. The lane opened. The hurt ships were patched enough to limp on or to wait for the proper repairs, and the crews were fed and watered, and we had lost not one soul, which I checked twice by hand against the manifest, because that is the only count that ever truly matters, and I do not trust a system to keep it. The Othel left a few weeks later. The agreement, as you might imagine, got renegotiated. The tally stayed. It was a marvel, and I never said otherwise. But it ran a little differently after that, with a thing the Othel had never built into it before, a line in the model they took to calling in their dry translated way the unforecast allowance. A reserve. Two of everything held back against the day the engine was wrong, in the dark where the model could not see it and feel ashamed. They were too proud to call it what it was. I let them have their word for it. A quartermaster does not need the credit. A quartermaster needs the bin to be full. SciFi came to the office the morning the lane reopened to them, to say whatever an Othel says instead of goodbye. The crest was the settled in-between color the whole time. The factor did not call my hold waste. The factor did not call my drills superstition. The factor stood in the door and watched me update the book one last time, and then said the thing that I have decided in the end is the closest a being who cannot carry a spare can come to an apology. We will keep two of everything now, SciFi said. It is inefficient. The tally calculates the cost precisely. I have read the figure. And I said. The crest flushed, just once almost warm. The day it happens, the factor said, no one will care what the figure was. Then the Othel left, with their hands no longer quite so empty, and I went back to counting things and writing the count in a book, and counting them again in case I was wrong the first time. There is no glory in it. There has never been any glory in it. But the bins are full, and I practice in the dark, and somewhere out on the Kale Reach, there is a species 900 years older than my own that has finally learned to remember the future the only way anyone ever has. You keep two of everything. And you practice in the dark.